This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
In this episode of Leap Forward, we're joined by Fionnuala Dugan, a pioneering strategist at the intersection of technology and content. With a background spanning multimedia innovation at EMI Records and digital transformation in publishing, she shares her journey through the evolution of digital content, from early interactive media to today's AI-driven educational tools. Her advice for EdTech founders: focus is everything. Well, listen, I'm absolutely delighted to have Fionnuala on this edition of Leap Forward. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, first of all, give us a bit of a rundown. You've had an incredible career. Give me kind of a few of those kind of major kind of moments, inflection points, and progressions as you've gone on to become, this multi-talented portfolio investor, advisor, thought leader, executive director. I could go on.
Thanks so much, Justin. So look, I've done lots of different things, mainly driven by interest at the beginning of my career. I started as an experimental physicist at Trinity College Dublin. So I'm from Ireland and I grew up in Dublin, and we all went to our local university, which was Trinity.
That's quite useful.
Yeah, it was very handy. With 6 children, most people tend to stay at home. But it was and that was a great subject, and actually, as I look back, it was actually a great choice because it prepared me for the digital world. It helped me understand what digital actually was when lots of people didn't know. So from that, I moved to London and I became a strategy consultant, which was sort of a new thing then, almost. And I specialized in the technology, strategic management of technology. So that was anybody making stuff with tech in it. And we worked a lot with Philips. The company was called Arthur D. Little, the consulting firm. And we worked with Philips as a client, which was one of the pioneers of, consumer electronics. The CD was developed by Philips. And so they were very innovative. And that started me on a career that was really about technology-fueled innovation. So technology-enabled innovation, whether that's old tech or software tech. So it was just really about making things with tech and what the possibilities were when tech came along and what you could do with it, what benefits you could bring, what businesses you could bring, what products you could make. So that was sort of the excitement for me. And that's kind of been the thread that goes through my whole career. So that's sort of how it started. So after that, I went and did an MBA because in those days, an MBA was the thing to do to convert from a scientist, which is what I was, into a business person, which is what I wanted to be. So I went to INSEAD in France, did an MBA, and that was great fun. And I learned a lot about how the sort of the nuts and bolts of business. And then I went into what was the beginning of the tech startup scene in London. So I came back from business school. All my peers went and became consultants or bankers or lawyers or advisors. And I went into the very new startup tech world, working first with a company called Maxwell Multimedia, which was one of the very early interactive media companies, and then moving on to others in that ilk. So and that was very exciting because we were pioneering lots of new ideas like interactivity, teaching people using multimedia, referencing large text volumes, and all kinds of things that those ideas all subsequently found their ways into products and services that you see now. And I suppose one of the observations from that time is that nothing ever happens overnight. Everything builds on the successes and more often the failures of other startups or product ideas or technologies that have had a grain of a good idea, but haven't actually had all the components that would make them into successful businesses. And timing is one of those components too. So that's sort of the sort of strand of my career was innovation with technology. And so after that period with multimedia new companies, I then went to work for established media, publishing, and entertainment organizations and spent about 20 years working for companies like Macmillan, EMI Records, Random House, and in every case, they were beginning to realize that tech and digital tech was coming along. They had no idea about the threat and they had no idea about the opportunity. And I was one of the people who was, I suppose, one of the early thought leaders um, brought on board to identify the threats and also, more interestingly, the opportunities. What was now possible with the internet? What was now possible with multimedia? What was now possible for their products and their publishing or their entertainment or their records or whatever. So those roles were really very interesting, sort of precedent setting roles. Um, One of the most interesting roles I had, which we just spoke about a second ago, was at EMI Records when I joined to set up a business called Abbey Road Interactive. So that's in the legendary studios up in North London. And we had a joint venture with Apple. And Apple donated a lot of computers, and we created multimedia, working with the record companies and the video distributors. We created multimedia products with interactivity, with additional materials, interviews with artists, offcuts, different takes, different sound mixes, etc. So we created multimedia products that we would then sell or use in other contexts, and that was a really exciting time. And spending time up at Abbey Road was absolutely wonderful. It's just an amazing place, full of the most talented people. Um, and it's extraordinary. And then I moved on at EMI. I moved into working with the record labels. So at that time, EMI was made up of EMI labels and all the Virgin labels, and that we had no new media at all, no multimedia, no internet, no Amazon, all of that. So it was all just beginning. So my job was to work with the labels and the artists and the artist managers to help them understand what was coming down the line, build out websites, build out reseller agreements, build the beginnings of websites and artist sites and digitize the music and begin to find ways of distributing that through ringtones and other kind of early uses of digital, if you remember those. So, at the very beginning, these were the kind of things of what can we do with this? How can it benefit the artist? How can it benefit the company? So it was all very, very exciting.
It's great. You're getting a very kind of plotted kind of history of the lot. It's fantastic.
Well, yeah, so it was the beginning of, and that time I suppose there wasn't any, and one of the things you observe is that the enabling technologies at that time, we didn't really have broadband, and when broadband eventually came along, which was, I don't know, around that time, so about 20 years ago, well, that made all kinds of things possible. So then you could start distributing video online, you could start distributing uncompressed audio online, and also it enabled the cloud to exist. So it was sort of jumping ahead in my career. So just going back, from the record business, then moved on to Random House, the publishing group, and I ran all their non-traditional formats, including ebooks, audiobooks, and all their new media products with authors. So we were making cookery apps with Nigella Lawson. We were doing audiobooks. I mean, we had Tony Blair reading his book, and we did an ebook and an audiobook and a print book at the same time. So we had all kinds of amazing connections with all these authors, and we made these incredible multimedia outputs. So book, audio, and a new media often as well. So these were new formats, and we grew them. So I think the ebook business is now 25 or 30% of the book publishing industry of the consumer side, and it was very exciting to be there at the beginning. One of the things to understand is that lots of the commercial foundations of the digital businesses had to be created. So, for example, we had to understand, sort of boring things, but very essential things about standards. What standard would everybody put their books into? Because if people put them in different standards, well, then you'd buy a reader and you wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't be compatible between the devices. There were also issues around what the relationship would be between the author and the agent and the publisher. So we had to renegotiate those deals for digital. So these were the things that happened as the industry transformed and started embracing digital. But after that period in publishing and entertainment, I looked at education, which is where I work now. And I realized that there was an enormous amount of potential in education, for there to be a better provision of education, and there was an enormous opportunity to improve the education sector through digital. So I moved into education about 15 years ago, and I've been in education ever since. So now I work as a partner at a firm called Carnegie. we're strategy consultants specializing in education and the broad education sector. And I also do some non-executive work with educational publishers and other startups in the space as well. Um, and that, and I really enjoyed that combination of roles.
What a fascinating career. And there's so many kind of connections, I suppose, in a sense, between everything that you've done and sort of, just kind of painting my own kind of picture, just listening to you there, take us through that sort of that plotted kind of history, I suppose. And the importance of, I mean, obviously that kind of, you've got that fantastic kind of, underbelly, I suppose, in a sense of strategic consulting and the MBA, and then layering on the strategic kind of consulting kind of capability, and then going through almost the beginnings of what is now, what most people
Yeah,
take for granted, I suppose,
I know.
in a
Yeah,
sense. And also that whole kind of content piece as well, I suppose, in a sense, and unlocking content and reformatting content, and then coming up with new business models for that content, and then applying that to education, I find fascinating.
yeah, yeah. No, it is fascinating. And you're right to say that every aspect is up for change. What the format is of the materials, what technology is driving it, what the business model is. So everything is up for change. And in education in particular, um, you know, the areas that is going to benefit the most are first the actual availability of resources. When you think about it, the digitization of learning materials has made content so cheaply available, almost freely available. You've got the MOOCs, you've got everything on YouTube, you've got all kinds of extraordinary resources online. So they can be delivered at tiny cost or no cost, almost instantaneous. And that's one of the really big benefits to education from digital. And that's happened pre AI, pre data. But the next kind of big benefit to education from technology is actually engagement. So engagement in materials is one of the things that all teachers try to get, but engagement at scale is going to be possible using digitally delivered materials and all the data that you get out of seeing who's engaging with what, and also then maybe iterating the materials to make them more engaging using multimedia, video, podcasts, audio, all kinds of variety for the different types of learning. So you can actually create really engaging materials, and then as AI and starts really becoming visible in education, even more so than it is now, you get the opportunities for deep personalization and individualized tutoring, and that actually helps with at the sort of the final part of the picture, which I mean, the ultimate education experience for anybody is a one-to-one.
Hmm.
But if you have the possibility of an AI tutor, which is sort of what's coming reasonably soon, you can get that sort of personalization. Now, of course, in lots of different education experiences, the tech is only there to supplement or enhance what the teacher is doing, and certainly in schools, I'm not an advocate for getting rid of the teachers. I mean, they perform an extraordinary important role. But if you're studying for an exam, or you're trying to prep for your GMAT, or you're doing something very specialized, or you're in higher ed or further ed, these tech platforms can really take a very important role. So it's very exciting to see all of that coming out and the benefits of all of that coming through.
It does feel like we're sort of, we're at a net, the net, like if you plot your kind of, your evolutionary kind of cycles that you've been through,
Yeah.
we are entering a new age, sort of, and you're alluding to kind of some of those kind of, really exciting kind of, things we've talked about doing, but we can now do. When you talk about education, there's a theme that sort of, is talked a lot about, which is sort of lifelong learning, I suppose, in a
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your kind of perspective on sort of, particularly kind of education when it comes to the workplace and dealing with some of the chronic and critical skills gaps that we've got as the world's accelerated on and we're still playing catch up somewhat.
I mean, the skill gap is extraordinary. The skill gap is extraordinary. Um, yeah, and digitized corporate training materials play a very important role in trying to close that skills gap. I mean, even companies like Microsoft, which you think is a tech company, they will have a skills gap because the people who work there, most of them won't even have heard of any of the new technologies. So, all the tech companies also have skills gaps. So, literally, the whole world has a skills gap. It's only when AI and data come through and the pace of change of that, of those, the capabilities of those platforms and the technology is extraordinary. So, you really do need to have lifelong learning programs inside corporations and outside corporations in order to help people understand the power of what's coming and help them use it in their jobs and in their lives. And digital training and digital provision of training is perfectly positioned to do that at scale. But I think it's incredibly important that those programs exist in organizations, but also, you know, governments need to get behind upskilling, reskilling workforces where the organizations haven't taken the lead. And clearly, there's a role for further education and higher education there too.
One of the roles that sort of you had kind of prior to your current one was taking the Economist into
Yeah,
kind of executive education, I believe.
that's right.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so The Economist is a wonderful organization with extraordinary talented writers and commercial people working there. So we decided that we would set up an executive education business which worked with The Economist's great assets, one of which is clearly their writing capabilities to write engaging materials which people draw people in. And one of the points I was making earlier on is that engagement in materials is one of the most important things in getting a high learning outcome. And then also, The Economist clearly has great reach into its audiences, and it's got something like 60 million followers online or some huge number. And also they have their brand, which in itself is prestigious and premium and has kind of educational connotations. So we thought we'd take those three things together and build a new executive education business. And when we looked at The Economist and what The Economist can uniquely bring, well, that brings us on to the subject of the higher order skills that we think at The Economist, people need to be learning in order to, you know, coexist peacefully with the AIs. So if you think about critical thinking and synthesis of large amounts of information, data visualization and data handling and data skills, and other kinds of skills like that, even higher order influence and persuasion skills. When we thought about those, we thought, well, The Economist actually does those pretty well because they themselves influence and persuade people all the time. And their mission is to really give people clear and concise understanding of what's going on in the world, which is actually getting much more difficult. But we thought we'd put all that into an executive education program, focusing on those skills. So that's a program that I launched about 3 years ago, and that's still going very strong. But it's an interesting subject about those skills. And when you think about the other thing that AI is actually able to do, we talked about, the personalization and the tutors. But in a funny way, AI can probably teach humans how to work better with AI, because AI can take on that Socratic role where it challenges and questions you, a bit like the way an executive coach does, and in that way, help an individual to develop their own reasoning skills and develop their own higher order skills. And again, you can do these things at scale with an AI, whereas before it was only for the privileged few.
So you're really democratizing access to the ultimate sort of performance coach.
Yeah, absolutely. You could democratize access to the ultimate performance coach. But then I suppose another tier would emerge at the very top where you got coached by Jeff Bezos or somebody yourself, but maybe an avatar of Jeff.
Or you could upgrade different LLMs and sort of,
Well,
upgrade
you
the
could, yeah, you could, yeah. I mean, so
augmentation
it's
of your.
really exciting when you think about the kinds of things that you can do, and also the fact that with an AI you only have to shoot it once, and then you duplicate it, and everybody can have access to it. It's not a great business model, because it's if it's that easily replicable, then it's very difficult to build businesses around a lot of these things. But it's the concepts are very cool.
It's really interesting you mentioned that because that was kind of going to be my next sort of question around, you've, as I said before, you've gone through this evolution of different business models, as you've digitized products and then come up with new services on the back of that digitization and so on. How are you seeing this kind of play out now in terms of what are the kind of models that you're kind of seeing working? We're beyond software as a service in
Yeah.
some ways and so forth. So tell me more about that.
Yeah. I mean, just on software as a service for a moment, I mean, that was the big thing sort of 5 years ago, I
Hmm.
think. And people would say, I'm going to build a software as a service business. And then you'd say, well, does anybody ever go out and say, I want to buy a software as a service? I mean, nobody does. They want to buy services. And sometimes you get a little bit stuck in the tech because software as a service is kind of a technical name, but actually you're buying a service. And I think that leads to the next thing really is that people don't buy technology. They buy the utility or the efficiency or the cost saving or the joy or whatever that they get from using the thing. But they don't actually go out to buy technology, as you know very well, Justin. So you still have to build a business, and the actual skill or the skill and the art and the intelligence and the technique to build businesses are still kind of the same. I mean, you need to know what your customer wants, and you need to know how you're going to sell that to your customer, and you need to keep. I mean, the things that are different, I'll get to in a second. But if you don't get that right, well, then you aren't going to have a business because if you aren't building out a product or service that you have a market for, it's going to be really difficult to build a business and to get to scale. The thing that is changing is that there's all sort of extraordinary technical products that you can use in running and collaborating in your business, which I'm sure you know very well, but also the pace of change of competitive activity and of what consumers able to do themselves and our businesses is actually changing very rapidly. So it's in a sense more difficult to get to a point where you've built a position of sustainability, but then potentially more valuable once you get there because then you can defend that position. Um, there's a market difference between going to market B2B and going to market B2C, as I'm sure you know. And a lot of venture capital and private equity is moving from B2C into B2B because they think that it's a stickier um, um, business relationship. It provides the capability of multi-year deals or subscription deals, and and also potentially you can expand and grow a large deal inside an organization, especially if it is a software service. Um, but that creates huge competition going into that space. So that's one of the dynamics at the moment is that there's an enormous amount of noise in the market, an enormous amount of people building out products that look and sound exactly the same, and customers have sort of, decision paralysis in a sense, because if everybody's got AI and everybody's doing almost very similar things, it's very hard for them to distinguish between them. And they'll just say, well, I'll just sit back and wait until the dust settles and all of this. I'm talking now B2B. So that's providing a very kind of sort of real noise in the market.
Ah, fascinating. And I guess that sort of waiting till the dust is settling, is that a strategy that you kind of believe, can be sustained, or in fact, when the dust settles, there's nothing left because the world's moved on. What are the kind of the big challenges, opportunities, and sort of questions you're being asked in your current kind of role at Ken Eagle?
So yes. So just to answer your question, the from the customer's point of view, they never actually, unless you've identified a really glaring unmet need, they probably don't ever have to switch
Right.
from their current solution, and they will probably have a way of doing what you're providing. They'll have a way of doing that already. So breaking into a new market with a new tech product is always going to be very difficult, and entrepreneurs always underestimate how long it takes and how much money they'll need. So there is, that has always been one of the dynamics. As far as what we're seeing in Carnegie at the moment, we do a lot of work clearly with education technology companies, and we're seeing companies wanting to grow and expand, which is what we mainly help them build strategies for. Um, and we're seeing, I think, increased, I guess, it's a point of larger disruption in the market, in the education technology market, certainly in the K-12 space, than than I think we've seen for quite some time. There's there's a lot of noise again from AI and what AI is going to ultimately be able to do, and there's also noise around whether or not AI is going to come in and take the value out of what you're doing now that you've built, that somebody's going to sort of leapfrog over what you've got, and then all of a sudden you don't have a product or service advantage. And that's a real fear with a lot of companies. Now, in the B2B space, or when you're selling to schools or selling to universities, what they actually want is reliable service, products that work, companies that are going to be here in 5 years, features and functions that are easy to use, that will integrate with their existing system. So there's companies that can actually understand that and actually are able to present their companies as those things stand a much better chance than going and saying, hey, we're the latest, greatest AI thing. They need to go in and say, we have maybe an AI enabled, but also a solid product that works. We're well funded. We know how to support you. We know how to upgrade you. We know how to, train your teachers or whatever to use it. So there's actually kind of a meeting of the old world, which is the customers, and then the new world, which is what all the features and products are able to do. Now, of course, there are genuinely um, big jumps in features and functionalities if you look at some aspects of teaching, like AR, VR, and their use. And if you look at what's possible with a lot of the maths platforms and other things, where there are genuine leaps in features and functionality, and the customers want those too.
Give me some, you don't have to mention any names if you don't want to, but give me kind of some real world kind of use cases that you're kind of grappling with, working on right now. I think what I'm interested in is kind of what whether it's on the demand or whether it's on the buy or sell side, or you're working closely with founders, or what sort of give me an example of, or a theoretical example of kind of what you're literally doing sort of right now.
So we work a lot with private equity.
Yeah.
So we see companies not. I worked with venture capital, as we discussed before, and now we work a lot with private equity. And private equity is usually coming in at a slightly more developed stage of the business. So they'll be, they might be kicking off an EBITDA of sort of 3 to 5 to 7 to 10, or even bigger. Um, um, Companies are mid cap companies, and most of them that we're seeing are actually, they're not, because they started 5, 10 years ago.
Hmm.
They're AI enabled, and they're using AI in their product set and also in their operations, but they're actually tech companies which are providing services to schools or to universities, and they've got the very good challenges of growing in another market. So maybe in the US, maybe in Europe, and they're looking at the classic British challenge of setting up operations in the US and trying to do that really well, and then understanding how to go to market in those territories, and trying to understand what the playbook is for that, and what the capital cost is of doing that. So quite familiar challenges,
Yeah.
but nonetheless important ones, in order and so we go through similar. A lot of what the work we do at Cairneagle is very robust primary and market research. So large scale primary research programs, and then also um, deep competitor analysis and customer interviews. So we do that, and then we merge that with judgment and insight and a lot of other factors to come up with strong recommendations. So in that case, it's really um, thinking hard about product market fit and where the demand really is, and really getting good understanding of how that demand is shaped, and then thinking about um, costs of going to market, business model innovation, price challenging, freemium models, all kinds of different things like that, and how they might work, and in the education context. So it's a really some of these projects are very interesting. In fact, they're all very interesting, but they're very interesting because it's a combination of different factors like that.
Yeah.
Um, and those are the kinds of British companies have very often gone into the US and done really really well.
To your point around opening up new markets, kind of, give me a global view, sort of what's
Yeah,
going on around the world. Like you're seeing, because, like you look at sort of, you look at China, you look at sort of Europe and the States and kind of the Americas, everyone's at different levels of
yeah,
maturity.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah,
what are the different kind of, what are the sort of differences of those markets? What are the insights
yeah,
that you're
yeah,
sort
yeah,
of
yeah,
looking at the
yeah,
moment?
yeah, yeah. Yes, super interesting question. I mean, it's so hard
It's a hard answer.
it's a very hard question to answer, because I'm thinking about the schools education
Yeah.
markets, K-12, and as you know, I mean, they've all evolved to settle at different, with their own different norms. Um, you've got countries like the US, which uses a lot of tech, but don't get the best results. Then you've got places like Germany, which uses very little tech, um, very little tech at all. I mean, they really don't use enough, but the results haven't they're not amazing, but they haven't seen a market decline. I mean, they are working hard to catch up, but the results are acceptable, certainly in certain parts of Germany. And then you've got, um, the Far East, which I can't say I'm an expert on, but does seem to be more technically advanced. You probably know more about the Far East than I do. Um, and then you've got, school systems like the UK, which is really starved of resource,
Hmm.
and where the provision is very patchy. It's a little bit like that in the States as well. So you've got some of the best and some of the worst. So it's I mean, solving the improving schools provision is not about getting technology in.
Hmm.
It's about leadership and funding. Um, uh, but technology can play a part in improving the provision if it's used well, and if it's invested in in a constant way, and a reliable way, and in an intelligent way. So it's yeah. So that's what we're seeing.
Tell me a little bit about the sort of the metrics that you use to kind of measure. What are your kind of go-to metrics?
Well, so looking and talking with our private equity
Yeah.
clients, it's really about revenue and
Hmm.
EBITDA, so revenue and profit. Um, but those metrics are the result of lots of hard work by a talented team trying to do their best. So, you know, like anything, if you look down the line and sort of for the prequel before the results come out, it's so important to put in operating metrics that are clever and that give you lagging or leading indicators of what if it's working well or not. So if you're going to market, if your customer recruitment is working, if you're converting them well, if you're getting the right price, so all of those different aspects, looking at your marketing too. Um, the financiers tend to look at the output, but the management are looking at the input and the operations. I look at both. Um, when you're looking at the output, it's too late to change it. But if you look at the operating KPIs, well, then you have time to change. So when I work on boards of companies, a lot of the questions are very, very simple. I was on the board of Tomorrow University, which is a wonderful new university in Berlin, and we worked a lot with them on the cost of recruiting students, and that's a constant for all businesses that go to market online. It's how much does it cost you to recruit your customer, and that the answer, the way to get that down is a lot of iterating in your actual messaging and going to market operations. Where are you advertising? What are you advertising? What's the timeline? How much are you spending? Have you iterated LinkedIn? Have you iterated your Meta or your Google? Which channel you're going on? Have you really got the platform to perform well for you? And then also, of course, something you know a lot about, which is brand. So once you establish some kind of brand, well, then you have a defensible moat, and word of mouth about your university will begin to flow. So what companies knew, this was a startup university, which is a fantastic operation. In the early years, they need to spend a lot more buying the students and paying maybe slightly over the odds for student recruitment, but then they would hope then that over time they would get word of mouth and their brand would then be the pull and the draw. Students would talk to each other, and then they'll get their cost of acquisition to a sensible number. It sounds like it's too much focus on that, but that's the biggest business cost for so many businesses that are recruiting online, and especially startup businesses that haven't got a brand for reputation. Um, so yeah, so that's sort of the metrics that I look at.
If you were to give sort of one piece of advice to a founder or a founding team kind of coming into kind of education technology right now, what would it be?
Focus, 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 focus. Um, so I mentor a wonderful tax and accounting AI-enabled software platform run by a wonderful female entrepreneur, Irish entrepreneur, and I work with her on focus, prioritization, and focus. She's got a fantastic AI platform which ingests the accounting syllabuses and creates learning materials. So she can create everything inside the platform. So for her, it's focus on going to market and getting in a number of really key clients. So for her, it's product development, but focus, focus, focus on her go to market. When I work with companies, I try to think find one or two things which I think they particularly need to do. So in her case, it's going to market. She's very good at product, but she doesn't know much about going to market. I worked with another company which was very good at going to market, but hadn't got any concept of brand building and name building, reputation building, and that's what they needed to do. So what I tend to do is I guess contextualize my advice based on where I see the greatest need. But it's always some kind of focus.
It's a great answer to the question. Okay, I'm going to ask you a few kind of rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So if you could instantly download any skill into your brain, like the Matrix, what would it be?
So that would be the piano playing skills of Bill Evans.
It's a great answer. Okay, who's your dream passenger, living or dead, that you'd love to share the ride with?
So I did think about that, and I think it's Graham Norton giving me GPS advice with Brendan Gleeson sitting in the back for entertainment.
Backseat driver.
Yeah, they'd be a great combination. Brendan Gleeson and Graham Norton.
The one piece of tech from sci-fi that you wish existed today.
Oh, the ability to change the climate.
First place you'd go if teleportation became real?
I would go to Hawaii.
And what do you bring?
My bikini.
Ultimate driving song?
Oh, my ultimate driving song. You see, there's a big Irish theme here. It's Van Morrison's Moondance album, one of my favorites.
Great choice. And lastly, the Marvel superpower you'd love to have.
Oh, that one. Oh, flying. Then I wouldn't need teleporting.
That's it.
Yeah,
Hawaii
yeah,
on speed dial.
yeah, exactly.
Thank you for a great conversation today. It's
Thanks
been a
so much,
pleasure.
Justin. It's been great.